Okay. Yeah. Got it. I've got it. Yeah.
Okay, well, welcome everyone, and thank you for your time today. My name is Mike Wilson. I'm going to give you a little bit of information about the differences in importing and exporting since Brexit and what the implications of Brexit have been. I hope it is informative for you. This is a subject which we've been spending a lot of time on in the last couple of years, in fact, but in particular over the last year or so. We've been doing a lot of Brexit reviews for companies, advising companies on the best operating model for them to set up in order to manage the transition and the changes that Brexit has brought, which are quite many and varied, as we'll see. So we're going to have a quick introduction, then we're going to look at what's changed in Brexit, the implications of that, how companies can address that challenge, what are the basics that they need to get right in order to be able to export and import. We're going to have a session, a little bit of time specifically about rules of origin, because that's one of the areas which the Trade and Cooperation Agreement brought in some changes that people need to be aware of if they're importing and exporting. And then we'll look at some of the key issues that real life, if you like, experiences of since Brexit, of what our clients have come up against and what the effects of those have been for them. And then a little bit about how to trade internationally, how to make the most of Brexit as the final session. But just a little bit, if I may, about Go Exporting. Go Exporting is a specialist export consultancy, as the name suggests. And we work to help companies expand into international markets. I set up the company about 3 years ago, passionate about international business and helping companies to expand their global reach. I've spent over 30 years in international business, in international trade and export, with my own businesses through to SMEs, consultancy, and then multinational corporations. I was the executive director for a US corporation for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, for example. So I've had a lot of experience over the whole of my career in international business. But I always felt I started my career a little bit in reverse. I started with having my own businesses. And I always, at that time, we were exporting and importing. I always felt there was a gap in the advice that we could get and the support we could get. You could get money from DIT as it was at the time to go to an exhibition or something like that. But to get practical advice from people that have been there and done it, if you like, it was very hard to find, to get the real support that you needed, the sort of day-to-day things that you need to do. So I saw a gap in the market, and I've always wanted to fill that. And that's why eventually, when I got fed up with the corporate world, I decided that I'd set up this business. So as part of that, obviously, we found that Brexit came along, and a lot of our clients were saying, well, what does this mean? So we turned ourselves into a specialist on the Brexit transition and what the implications are. And we've done many webinars for people like Business Wales, Enterprise Ireland, for banks, trade associations, and so on, training courses on this subject, written booklets and articles and so on this. And as I say, we've done many reviews for clients and audits for clients and what they need to do. So we're I would say, specialists in this area now, or recognized as specialists, as well as our core business, which is helping companies to expand into international markets. So what changed with Brexit? What are the big differences? We hear a lot about the WTO, World Trade Organization. Well, really, what is it? A lot of people don't really know what it is or what it does. And we also heard a lot about needing a trade agreement with the EU. Finally came at the 11th hour, didn't it? But what is a free trade agreement, and what effect does that have on trade? And what effect has the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement, as it's called, what effect has that had on the way we're dealing and way we're trading with Europe these days? So the big differences. So the big difference is we're no longer part of the customs union or the single market. That was probably one of the biggest benefits of the EU, certainly for businesses, was that you could send goods freely around the whole of the EU without a customs declaration, without too much fuss, red tape or anything, and without problems with VAT, for example. You could just send a shipment, pop it in the post to send it to France, and there'd be no issues. That's all changed with Brexit. Now there are rules and regulations that you need to follow. Customs declarations, for example, are required on all shipments that come in or out of the country. If you think about that for a moment, before Brexit, there was around 50 million export declarations or customs declarations made in the UK every year for goods coming in from outside the EU. They reckon, it's estimated, will have gone up to 300 million post-Brexit. So as you can imagine, that's a hell of a burden on the people that provide customs declaration services, the HMRC services as well, the software and the systems. It's a hell of a change. And when that's just the declarations that are needed in the UK, the same thing is in the EU as well. So there's a huge amount of paperwork that's being created and a whole industry that's been created because of this change. Effectively, we've become a third-party country to the EU. We're no longer part of their club, so we're no longer part of the customs union or the single market. So when they buy from us or we buy from them, it's the same as if we bought from Japan or from the US. Nothing is any different in many ways. While we were part of the EU, we also had access to the EU free trade agreements with other countries. So the EU had around 60, 70 trade agreements with different countries like Japan and so on, which we were party to. As soon as we left the EU, we ceased to be involved in those trade agreements. So as you've probably seen in the press, Liz Truss has been going around all over the world trying to enter into new agreements that either mirrored the old agreements with the EU or some new ones. She's been quite successful, for example, with Australia recently and other areas that we're working on. But all of those trade agreements that we used when we were with part of the EU needed to be renewed. We were out of those and could no longer rely on them. And without a free trade agreement, under international law, you fall back onto terms under what's called the World Trade Organization. And the World Trade Organization sets rules and tariffs for international trade, which are very important for international trade and for monitoring flows of goods and so on. But there are some difficulties with that. So what is the World Trade Organization? It started off 100 years or so ago, more than that. In 1995, it had 125 nations were members, but now there is 164 members, which covers 90% of global trade. So we, as the UK, are part of the World Trade Organization, as are countries in the EU. But what it does is it sets levels of duty and a method of working between countries that don't have a free trade agreement between them. And there's a level of reciprocity in there, so that what's agreed is that you won't charge a higher rate to one country than you will do to another. So you're not distorting international trade. So that's what the World Trade Organization is. That's what it monitors, and it helps to resolve disputes and so on. And it sets maximum duty levels for different products. One of the problems with that, and one of the fears when we were leaving the EU, is that some of those duty rates are quite high, and they're designed to protect national business. For example, national dairy product production, as you can see there, duty is 37.5% according to WTO rules. Confectionery 21%, animal products and so on, going down to certain goods which are 0% even within the WTO. So it really depends on what product you're dealing in, how you're going to be affected by duty rates around the world. And what we've tried to do is, where you have a free trade agreement, that improves on these rates that you can see there. The idea is that two countries or two blocks of countries agree preferential terms, it's called. So you get a preferential rate of duty between the UK and the EU in this case, because of the free trade agreement that we've entered into. But if there is no free trade agreement, then you fall back onto World Trade Organization rules, regulations, and duties, which, as I say, you can see here, can be quite a burden on companies. And there was a big fear after Brexit that we would, if we had a hard Brexit with no free trade agreement, then these rates that you can see here would have applied to our goods between trading with the EU. And considering the EU is our biggest trading partner still, that would have had a huge impact on goods exporting and importing into the UK from the EU. What is a free trade agreement? A free trade agreement, we always just think of it as an agreement on duties, but it's much more than that. It deals with, yes, customs duties, but also trade facilitation, trying to make it easier for countries to deal with each other. So there's not as much red tape. For example, rules of origin, which we've already mentioned, will be a separate topic in this webinar, because that is a huge area that can affect trade. The types of certificates and licenses that are required when trading between countries, whether there's a mutual understanding or acceptance of each other's standards, for example, is an important point. Trade in services, it was mentioned that services is a big area for some of your clients. So services are often now included in a free trade agreement so that there's no hindrance under law, so there's mutual recognition of each other's qualifications, for example, so that a solicitor from the UK can go and work in Germany and so on. But that's not always the case in all free trade agreements. There's not always mutual recognition. There's also provisions on foreign investments, removing barriers to trade, and also protection for overseas countries, companies investing in a country. So these things tend to be, all intellectual property has been mentioned, all of these things now get included in a free trade agreement. So it's a much bigger task to agree a free trade agreement than it used to be. They're now called deep integration free trade agreements, because you really are integrating the two areas, the two countries, very deeply to ensure as free a trade as possible. Sustainability and so on, labor laws and things like this are becoming more and more important and part of these types of agreements as well. We know that was part of the UK-EU agreements as well, about maintaining EU labour laws and so on. So this is what had to be negotiated between the UK and the EU before we left. And this way, we really went up to the wire, didn't it? Was it the 23rd of December when the free trade agreement with the EU was finally signed? But this is why, because there were so many complications and so many areas that needed to be covered in order to agree a final deal. But what does the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement say? It was very much last minute, as we've said. But what it says is that there will be no tariffs or quotas for UK-EU goods traveling or being shipped between the two areas. There are some caveats on that, though. One of them is the rules of origin, and there won't be any tariffs or quotas or duties, providing the goods are either UK or EU origin. UK origin if we're exporting, EU origin if we're importing. If they are, and that can be proven, then there's no duty. The agreement, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, did state that bilateral accumulation was allowed. What that means is, we'll go into a bit more detail later, but what it means is that goods that come into the UK from the EU can be classed as UK goods in terms of saying that the product is a UK origin product when you send it back to the EU, but only if you've done a certain amount of processing on those goods in the UK. And that is one of the big areas of concern that companies have had. You may well have heard in the news at the beginning in January, February time about Marks and Spencer's Percy Pig product, where they were suddenly going to find that there was duty on that product when they shipped it to Ireland, for example. They imported that product from Germany, already packaged, just held it in their warehouse, and then would send it back out again to Ireland. But under the terms of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, because they weren't processing that product in the UK, that became a third country product, if you like, and duty had to be charged at the WTO rates that we just looked at. And for confectionery, I think it was 21%, something like that. So it's a high duty rate. So even though on the face of it, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement seems to make trade between the two areas, the UK and Europe, free, in reality, in the detail, it's not necessarily so. And because of that, you may need to use custom simplifications in order to get around some of those issues, things like having a customs warehouse. Again, we'll look at that a little bit later. One good thing that the agreement did have was mutual recognition of each country's or each area's authorized economic operators. So it's like an advanced exporter scheme. So where you get preferential recognition of your status as an exporter, and we mutually recognize that. So for big exporters, that was a big part. For the types of companies that you're dealing with, it won't have any effect. The agreement covered product and regulatory compliance, but again, that's not necessarily been done in a very comprehensive way, because, for example, the UK has introduced our own version of CE marking called the UK CA, and the EU will not recognize UK CA. And after the end of this year, we won't recognize CE. So in effect, a company could have to have two compliances, two product regulations that will cover its products. Services were not really covered in the agreement to any great extent. So things stayed pretty much the same, apart from things like if you're going to work, if you can send someone to work from the UK into the EU, even if it's temporarily, if that is part of certain types of contracts, then that person needs to have a work permit. There's also limitations on the amount of time that you can spend traveling in the EU. So you can only be there 90 days out of 180, any 180 days. So 180 days in the year in total, but in two blocks. So again, for some people, that can be quite a burden if they're splitting their time between two countries, or like I used to do, I used to travel 250 days a year. So that can make quite a big difference. Financial services wasn't covered in the agreement at all, and is still not covered. See today, Rishi Sunak saying that the discussions on that are not getting very far. So that could be a big blow for the UK economy, because we were so reliant, particularly in London, on financial services. So that's an area which the agreement didn't really help anyone. Business travel restrictions I've just mentioned, and trademarks and intellectual property. Someone mentioned about that. The UK has introduced its own version of the trademarks and has sort of mirrored the EU trademarks. So anything that was trademarked in Europe is automatically trademarked in the UK for the moment. And the agreement also covered enforcement. What happens if it goes wrong? And we've already seen some of that, haven't we? We've already seen the EU threatening to take us to court, legal action. We've seen the UK threatening to leave the agreement altogether. And there are mechanisms in the agreement to enforce it, and for sanctions and so on that can be imposed if we don't follow the agreements. So that's what the Trade and Cooperation Agreement says. That was the agreement that everyone was waiting for. We were hoping that, you know, it was going to give us similar access to the European market compared to previously. So almost like a customs union. You know, certainly businesses were looking for that, but from a ideological point of view, the government didn't want that if it had strings attached to it. So we've ended up with a bit of a sort of hybrid situation, I guess, but with a lot of complications for businesses for importing or exporting. And some of those, you can see that the poor guy there is blown his mind with all of the things that he needs to consider. And that's, I think, is how a lot of our clients feel when they start delving into what are the implications of Brexit and how do we handle it. You know, they go to the gov.uk website and we call it death by link. It goes from one link to another, and the client still ends up not really understanding what they should be doing. So that's where companies like ourselves come in, that we can help them break it down and bring it into a sort of business understanding, if you like, and help them generate the right operating model. But we're going to go through each of these areas. There's 11 implications that we've picked out. There are many more probably, but these are the main ones that we've picked out that businesses need to be aware of and need to deal with in order to be able to export and import effectively. So the first one is the HS code. Now, the HS code is the harmonized standard, is a harmonized customs code, which most countries of the world use to denote what a product is for customs purposes. There are something like 5,000 different codes that cover different products, or probably more than that actually. And the starting point for exporting or importing to the UK now is knowing what your HS code is. Now that can be quite a shock to a lot of companies, because if they'd only been dealing with the EU previously, they probably never had to have a HS code. It wasn't needed. But now, to send something to France, you need to know what this HS code is for your product. And you can check what it is. Sometimes it's not easy to decide which code you should be using. Some of the descriptions are a bit vague and can be quite hidden. So it can be quite difficult to actually decide what the HS code is. Most companies ask their supplier, but if they're a manufacturer, then they have to work out what their code is. You can ask the HMRC for a ruling on what the code should be, but you need to have this code to export or import your product. It's what customs will be looking for on the customs declaration to decide which duty rate should be applied to the product, if there are any licenses that are required to import or export that product, if there are any approvals, if it needs to have some kind of approval like CE or something more than that, if it needs to have a sanitary certificate or a vet certificate, for example, that kind of thing. All of those kind of things start with the HS code. That's how customs and other authorities work out what's required for that product. Which procedures are required, if there's specific paperwork that's required for bringing that product in or out of the country. And you really have to make sure it's right. Be surprised how often we're working with clients and they're using the wrong HS code. And sometimes that using the wrong HS code is by accident, and they may be paying more duty than they should be doing. And sometimes it's on purpose so that they can avoid duty. And in either case, you've got to make sure that it is right and that you put it right, because if you're ever inspected or there's any query from customs and you're found to be using the wrong one, then there can be implications for that, including fines and so on. But if in doubt, you should ask for a ruling from, as I say, from HMRC. So you can either ask for a sort of an informal ruling where they'll give you their opinion, or you can ask for a binding ruling, which binds them as well as you, so they have to treat your product with that particular code. So which obviously has benefits in terms of comfort, but also if you don't like that code and the duty it confers, then it can be quite a burden as well. We put there a couple of websites where you can check what the HS code is for your product, so gov.uk websites, and then website where you can check what the implications of that HS code are for importing and exporting. So one of the other implications of exporting from the UK now is that you need to have, if you're exporting any product, you need to have what's called an EORI number. So that's Economic Operator Registration and Identification Number. So every company that sends goods out of the country, selling goods out of the country, needs to have this number, and the number has to be quoted on their customs documentation, their commercial invoices, and so on. So it's very important that companies that want to trade internationally have this number. Not every company, you don't get it automatically. If you're a new company, they will have to apply for this. It's free to apply for and relatively quick, but you do need to apply for it to have that code in place, that number in place. You may also need an EORI number in the EU. So depending on how you're trading. So if you're a company that's selling from the UK and you're selling into the EU, but you want to deliver to your client what's called DDP, delivered duty paid, you actually then need an EORI number in the EU as well. Another circumstance where you would need an EU or EORI number is if you're importing directly into the EU from a third country. So if you're based in the UK, but you're importing into the EU from Japan, for example, it's going straight there, and you're clearing the goods in through customs in the EU, then you would need an EU EORI number. So again, it's important that companies understand their own trading, the way they're dealing, and whether they need to have a UK and EU EORI number. You only need one EORI number for the whole of the UK. The whole of the EU. So most companies, or a lot of companies, will look at Ireland because it's the same language, so it's easy to register. A lot of the other countries have English language sites where you can do it as well. But in theory, you have to apply in the country where you're first going to supply a product or need an EORI number in the EU. So you should, if you're sending goods to France, you should apply in France, for example. But it is again, let's say that's something you do need. And the other thing you may need is if you're dealing with Northern Ireland, which should be, from our point of view, part of the UK, but under the Northern Ireland Protocol, it is actually effectively almost part of the EU. And you need to have an EORI number specifically for Northern Ireland, which has an XI in front of it. So you would need to apply for that if you're importing goods and clearing goods yourself into Northern Ireland. If your customer's clearing goods in Northern Ireland, you don't need it, but if you're doing it yourself, then you would need it. So Northern Ireland is a bit of a strange one. We'll look at it a little bit more later on, but the thing to note here is that you need to have EORI numbers to export or import. If you're importing into the UK, you need an EORI number as well. So that the government can monitor and understand the economic transactions that you're doing internationally, basically. But again, one of the biggest areas of change is red tape, is customs declarations. We've mentioned it already. We've heard about it on the news, haven't we? We hear about it all the time that customs declarations are required. People are struggling with customs declarations. There are different rules at the moment that apply whether you're importing or exporting. The UK government has introduced a staged customs declaration procedure, so that for this year, if you're importing into the UK, you can actually delay your customs declaration at the point of entry for up to 175 days. You have to put in a simple declaration, but then the full declaration can come 175 days later. And with that delay, you can also delay paying any duty, for example. We're getting to a situation now where we've just entered the situation where goods arriving into the UK in January, now they've come to the end of their 175 days, and these companies are having to now lodge their full customs declaration with customs. And again, that's causing a surge of requirements for customs declarations, on customs agents to do this kind of work. And there are some delays which are happening. But that was a good scheme that the government introduced to ease the transition a little bit by allowing companies just to have a simple declaration at the time the goods come in, and then to do a full declaration later. Some chose to just do a full declaration straight away if they were already used to doing it. But for new companies, often their freight forwarder or their courier would do it in that way. But after the end of this year, from January next year, we'll have to have full customs declarations at the time the goods are imported into the country. Now, most companies use a customs agent to do their customs declarations. So they'll either use, for example, a courier company, or they'll use a freight forwarder, or an independent customs agent who will handle all of that paperwork transaction for them. Because otherwise, to do it yourself, you have to be approved to use what's called the chief system for HMRC. So most companies, unless you're doing large volumes, don't want to go through that process. So certainly for new startups, they'll use their courier company, for example, or the freight forwarder to handle the customs declarations for them. But what they have to realize is they are still responsible to give the right information to the courier or to the freight forwarder to make the declarations, including the HS code. They have to make sure they give them the right HS code. They have to make sure that they do have this EORI number that we've just mentioned. So they need to have all of that information in place before they start making shipments, and the couriers won't accept them without this information anyway. So it's important that they have that in place. The post office has forms of the CN22 for goods that are less than £270, or CN23 for goods over that level, which you can fill in, and they handle all of the paperwork for you if you're sending goods by post. But it should be, we'll talk later about VAT. There have been some changes in regulations in the EU, just came in yesterday, in fact, on sending goods to the EU when you're selling directly to consumers. So we'll look at that in a moment. But from the beginning of this year, there's always been duty payable on control goods. So that's some goods like explosives and things like that. So there are certain control goods where duty and declarations have always been payable. The other way around, the EU didn't allow any easement like this. So from day one, from 1st of January this year, anything you exported, you had to have a full customs declaration for it. And what we're finding is that for a lot of companies, that's a big burden in terms of the cost. It can be anything from £15–20 per declaration up to £40–50. I've heard of some that are £60, just depending on who's charging it, and there's been a bit of profiteering, I would say, in the market as well. So there's some quite high costs. So if you're a small retailer sending a package that's only worth £40, for example, and you're getting costs of £20 for it, then obviously that's quite a chunk out of it doesn't make it feasible, it doesn't make it economically viable to do that kind of thing in many cases. So a lot of smaller companies have actually they've stopped exporting because of that, and they're looking for ways around it. Situation's sort of calming a little bit, but certainly a lot of companies have stopped. In fact, at the beginning of the year, some of the courier companies stopped taking exports as well. DPD in January, February stopped taking any exports because the paperwork was just so all over the place. their customers weren't ready with the right information, and it was causing too much disruption to the services, so they stopped it altogether. They're back up and running now, but you can see the kind of disruption that that it did cause at the time, and still has potential to cause if people don't get it right, and certainly delays at customs, goods getting lost. I spoke to a client yesterday who sent some skincare products to Lithuania, and they've just disappeared with no idea where they are, for example. So that's not necessarily just down to Brexit, but they've also had problems with paperwork and so on. So customs declarations is a big area, one of the big changes from leaving the EU. So now you have to have a customs declaration for everything that's imported and exported. And for certain products, if it's live animals, any products with animal products within it, and be surprised which products that might be. I've got a client that does vitamin products and healthcare products, and some of those have more than 50% animal products in them. So they fall into this category where they need to have either sanitary or phytosanitary certificates. So phytosanitary certificates are for plants, for example, to show that they meet a certain standard, that they're healthy, and they're not sending we're not sending any disease or importing any disease into the country. So there's a whole area of regulation here. Now we've heard recently, haven't we, about the sausage wars with in Northern Ireland, and this is all down to this kind of thing, to needing certificates for food-based products, animal products, to enter into, in this case, Northern Ireland. But Northern Ireland, as we say, is actually treated as part of the EU in terms of the kind of certificates and declarations that you need now. So, physical checks are required at destination at the moment, until the end of this year. But as from next year, physical checks on these kind of products will be at the border, and you'll have to send goods via a particular border post in order to get them through into the country. There's a lot of document checks. You have to pre-notify arrival of these goods from October. You don't at the moment, but from October you'll have to pre-notify customs that you've got an animal product coming into the country, for example. And if it's an animal product or a live animal product, you may need a health certificate, and that has to come travel with the consignment. I had a lot of clients at the beginning of the year, the very start of this, with shellfish, for example. There was a lot on the news, wasn't there? Like the people that export live fish, for example, from the UK. I had clients in Cornwall, Cornish fishermen, that were really struggling with this, getting the right certificate in the right amount of time, because obviously live animals, you have to get them there while they're still fresh and still alive. So there was a lot of issues with that. So it depends what products your clients that you're talking to are dealing in, but there may be some unexpected complications for example, in plants and plant products. It may seem like a simple product, but there may be quite a bit of regulation that surrounds them in terms of what they need to be able to get them in and out of the country now. Whereas before, when we were part of the EU, these goods could move around without these kind of certificates, because we were all part of one market. So this is one of the really big differences for certain products and for certain companies. And then there are also implications for certain products for where you need licenses. If there's goods that could be classed as dual use, for example. So if there's something that that maybe could be used as a weapon, for example, or items of torture, for example, that kind of thing. There are rules and regulations that you can only bring them in. Torture items have already got to go to a museum, I hasten to add, but there are rules around that kind of goods that have now came in with Brexit as well, so that you have to follow and make sure you see whether your products need a particular certification or license. One important area that's coming is that all wooden packaging must be what's called ISPM 15 compliant, which means it's been treated to make sure there's no creepy crawlers in it and things like that. That's again something new. It wasn't, you know, we just trusted previously that anything moving around the EU would be fine, but now this is a regulation, so it means you've got to get certain type of pallets if you're shipping on pallets, for example. Again, it's something which, you know, people need to be aware of if they're when they're shipping. And rules of origin. Now, we've mentioned these already. So what are rules of origin? We call this, we wrote about this, I wrote an article about this about 18 months ago, and I called it the greatest Brexit challenge that no one had ever heard of at the time. And it really is, because it can really change how we trade, and has really changed for some products. It has a great effect on the, you know, on the way that the tariffs that are involved in it. So really, rule of origin, it determines the economic nationality of your product. It's the product's passport, if you like. It says whether it's, you know, UK, EU, China, India, wherever it might be. You might think that's simple, you know, it's where you bought the product from, but no, it's not. It's where the product was manufactured and which components from which areas make up the biggest proportion of that product. So there are a whole list of complicated rules and regulations, which we'll look at a little bit later. But you need to be aware, you need to understand what is the origin of my product, what is the real origin. And your new start businesses, for example, if they're buying a product, even if it's from a UK manufacturer, they need to make sure that that product is from the UK. They need to ask the manufacturer for what's called a supplier's declaration that that product is from the UK. If it is, and they have that, they can then, if they're exporting it to the EU, they can then say that this product is UK origin and we're claiming preferential duty, so there's zero duty when they send it to the EU. If they don't have that, and it's not UK origin, without it, duty will be charged at the WTO rates that we saw earlier, which, as we saw, can be quite high. So the origin of the product is very, very important, and how you handle it and having the right evidence is also very important. It affects the duties, it affects quotas, it affects the standards that apply, you know, and a lot of the information is in the free trade agreement on how you determine a product is UK or EU origin. Supply chains can be surprisingly complex these days. Before Brexit, British car manufacturers reckon that only 41% of components that go into cars made in the UK are actually sourced in the UK. And of that 41%, actually only 25% was actually UK product. The other percentage was actually, you know, sourced in the UK, but actually came from overseas. So you can see it can be very complicated. You know, if you've got a washing machine that's manufactured or assembled here, the drum might have come from one country, the casing from another, you know, the wiring from another, and so on. So you have to put all that together to work out what the origin of a product is. And for small businesses, they'll probably be buying a finished product, but the key thing is that they make sure that they ask and have in writing what the origin of the product is, what its nationality is. So it can be quite expensive to actually gather that information for companies, the administration burden, and sometimes it's not worth it. You know, if it's going to cost you 4 or 5% of your costs to actually hold and gather that information, but the duty is only 1%, then some companies just don't bother, and they just say don't claim preferential duty. So again, we'll talk about that in a bit more detail later. Again, another big implication of Brexit and leaving the single market and the customs union is that VAT is now due on every shipment coming into the UK or going into the EU. So import on import VAT is due and has to be paid by whoever is the importer of record, so who is importing those goods. So if you're importing something from France into the UK, when it arrives in the UK, let's say it's worth £1,000, there's £200 of VAT that's due on that product. And previously, before Brexit, that wasn't the case. You could just send goods all the way around the EU, and there was no VAT charged. There was no VAT at all. So that was quite simple. But now it's much more complicated, and some of the biggest challenges that our clients find are around VAT. I had one this morning from a very large manufacturer of health products to 30-40 million pound turnover, and they're really struggling with part of this now for sending goods into the EU. In fact, they have VAT numbers in virtually every country in the EU to try and alleviate some of this. So in many cases, as we put there, some customers may need a VAT number in the EU as well as a UK VAT number. So it depends on how they're dealing, what kind of operating model they're looking at. If they're sending a product and they're responsible for the import declaration, then they will have to pay the VAT, and they need to make sure they can reclaim that. So this is a key area. If you don't have that, if you're sending it to France and you've said that you're going to handle the customs arrangements, sending it what's called DDP, delivered duty paid, then you will be charged that VAT by your haulier, your customs agent, but you won't be able to reclaim it. So it's an additional cost for your business. So it's an area which is critical that companies get right, and they fully understand the implications of this. The UK VAT numbers can't be used for what was called triangulation, or what is called triangulation. There was a special rule within the EU that, for example, if you're a UK company and you sold something to a company in Germany, for example, but your supplier was in France, the supplier in France could send it directly to Germany for you, and there would be no VAT implications of doing that. You can't do that anymore. So I have one client who's actually buying goods from Hungary that he wants to send to Germany, and he's having to ship them to the UK first before he ships them back again, because otherwise he has to have a VAT number in either Hungary or Germany, and the administration of it is quite difficult. So there are, again, lots of complications and implications there for traders of products. It used to be so easy, but not anymore. And again, up to now, we've been talking mainly about B2B, business to business sales, but B2C goods to consumers has changed, and there's some quite considerable changes there. It's an export and import, so there's VAT due on these transactions as well now. We used to have a low value consignment relief. We used to be able to send goods up to €22 and there'd be no VAT. That's just been withdrawn from the 1st of July. So now there's VAT on every single shipment that goes into or out of, into the EU and into the UK for that matter. So customers, businesses have got to decide how they're going to fulfill their orders. How they're going to do it, what terms are they going to use, and what implications are there for their relationship with their customers. Will their customers accept it? It's not guaranteed that the customer will accept these terms, and they may demand something else, and they potentially lose business, or they don't get business in the first place if it's a new start business. There are ways around it. Some of them can be quite complicated, and it depends on the volume. You could have an EU-based warehouse, for example, to fulfill customers' orders. if you do that, if you send goods to a warehouse in the EU, you still have to have a VAT registration number in that particular country. So if you send them to the Netherlands, you have to have a VAT number in the Netherlands in order to be able to do that. You have companies like Amazon that offer their fulfillment centers. They have something called a pan-European fulfillment agreement, where you can they'll actually send, hold your goods in any one of their warehouses or any number of their warehouses around Europe, and they'll handle all the paperwork for you. But again, you do end up with VAT registration numbers in each country, which Amazon does administer for you and organizes for you, but obviously for a fee. So it can be quite complicated, and it's so important that businesses sit down and work out how they want to operate, what they need to do, and that they do it properly in the first place, and understand the implications of that. And that's a lot of the work that we do. Because, for example, to have a VAT number in certain countries, you need to have what's called, in some countries, a fiscal representative. And that is a representative in that country who actually acts on your behalf and is jointly jointly liable for the VAT that you might be due. So again, of course, you have to pay a fee for them to offer that service, and you may have to provide a guarantee. So there are clearly complications around VAT that were never even thought of before Brexit, when you could just send goods anywhere throughout the whole of the EU without having to charge VAT. Doesn't affect services so much. In services, you still have what was called the reverse charge mechanism, effectively, so that you zero rate VAT for a service. So I invoiced a customer in Slovenia, for example, today, and we didn't charge VAT, but you have to put a statement on your invoice saying that they have to account for the VAT in their own country. So from a service point of view, it's not changed particularly, but from a goods point of view, importing and exporting, it's a major change, as you can see, and quite complicated changes. And of course, it can have cash flow implications if you've got to pay the VAT, on import on every shipment. That can be quite a burden on your cash flow at that moment that the goods are coming into the country. The UK government has introduced delayed VAT accounting. So if you import something into the UK, you can put the VAT onto your next VAT return rather than having to pay it at the point of import. But not every country is offering that facility, and certainly not to UK companies unless you're registered there. And as we've said, selling B2C has changed. It changed in January because it became an import and an export rather than just a movement across Europe. But it also changed yesterday as well. On the 1st of July, the EU has introduced what's called the one-stop shop procedure. And the one-stop shop is designed to make sure they collect VAT on every shipment that goes into the EU, basically, from wherever it may go, so that there's no low consignment value threshold anymore. Everything has to be VAT, and the emphasis on collecting the VAT is on the supplier. So if you sell something to someone in France, you have to collect French VAT at the French VAT rate. And that can be quite complicated because the VAT rates in the EU vary between 17 and 27%. It's not the same in every country. So the rate that you have to collect is different. So if you're selling through your website, you have to have that capability to be able to add VAT at the right rate for that particular country, to be able to collect it. But if you're collecting that VAT, you have to have a mechanism for paying it to the French or the Hungarian authorities, for example. You either have to have a VAT number in that country, or you can register for this new one-stop shop procedure that the EU has introduced, where effectively you register once, and that gives you effectively a VAT registration in every country in the EU. So you can you can make one return, and that will distribute the funds to the right tax authorities in the right countries, depending on where you've sold the goods. Sounds relatively easy, but of course you have to make sure that two things that I've just mentioned, you have to make sure that you've charged the right VAT, the right percentage of VAT. You have to keep the records. You have to make sure those records are correct and that you put them onto your one-stop shop return correctly, detailing each shipment that you've made. And this service is only available for consignments up to 150 euros. So if you go over that, then you've got to go back to a normal import VAT situation, and either pay the VAT yourself or have a VAT number, or put the burden on, the emphasis onto your customer to pay that themselves. So it's one-stop shop is in some ways is simplifying things, but in some ways it's complicating things as well. It does allow you to only have that one registration, but there's a lot of record keeping that you need to have, and to register for import one-stop shop, which is what a UK company would have to do if they're selling into the EU. You need to have a fiscal representative in the country where you're applying for it. So you need to have a company that represents you in that country with the authorities there. There are companies you can buy that service, but again, it's an additional cost, and of course, it's a complication. It sounds complicated, and to be honest, to a certain extent, it is complicated. But you can cut through it. So effectively, you need two systems: one for consignments up to 150 euros, where if you're a UK company exporting, you would register for what's called import one-stop shop, and above 150 euros, you need to decide who's going to pay the VAT on import into the country, whether you're going to put that emphasis onto your customer, which they may not like, because they'll have to pay it to the courier company, for example, before they can get delivery of the goods, or you have to pay it, but then you have to have a VAT number in that country to be able to reclaim it. So it becomes complicated. And one of the other, say, complications is that the member state, the rule is now that you have to charge the VAT in what's called the member state of consumption. So effectively, the country that you're sending the goods to, where your customer is, you've got to charge the VAT rate in that country, not in your country. So although you're collecting it on their behalf. Has anyone got a headache yet? So VAT. I mean, you can see we've got 3 slides on VAT because it is such a complicated area and such an important area. It really has a massive effect on the way companies are dealing. I would say that probably now 2/3 of the questions that we get from clients are surrounding VAT and how they handle this kind of thing. So, and the same applies coming into the UK. We have the same scheme here for an EU retailer that wants to sell into the UK. We're removing the low VAT, the £15 threshold where it's free. We're having a similar scheme to import one-stop shop. So it's everything is changing basically, and because of that, a lot of companies have looked at setting up in the EU, for example, UK companies, or having a warehouse in the EU so they can ship goods to a warehouse and ship out from there. Again, there are all sorts of issues you have to look at around that, and admin costs, of course. But there are certain ways around it that we can advise clients on. And one little fear that some of the VAT experts have got is that the EU VAT authorities are going to use the one-stop shop to give them greater visibility of the volumes of VAT that should have been charged in the past. Because in the past, if you went above a certain threshold of shipments into the EU, you should have registered for VAT in a particular country then. But a lot of companies didn't do that, even when they should have done, and there wasn't really a way for the EU authorities to pick it up. But one of the things that VAT experts think is that the EU might use the data that they gather now through the one-stop shop to have a look back and make sure that those companies were really paying what they should have done previously. So there may be some inspections coming down the road. Hopefully not, but that's what some of them think. We mentioned Northern Ireland earlier. I mean, Northern Ireland is, it's, as far as we're all concerned, it's part of GB. But really, as far as the EU is concerned, it's another EU country. It's another EU territory. So when we're sending goods from England, for example, to Northern Ireland now, there's a customs declaration. There's effectively a border in the North Sea. You have to have a customs declaration to get your goods in there. And goods coming from Southern Ireland into Northern Ireland don't need a customs declaration. There's free movement of goods. So it's just the same as it was previously, just the same as if it was part of the EU. But having said that, if we're sending from the UK, from England to Northern Ireland, you would still charge VAT in the same way as you would if you were sending within England. So you charge VAT on the goods. So you need to be aware that sending goods there, you would need there's a customs declaration that would need to be filled out. We talked earlier about the sort of sausage wars, where you need it's just been they've just agreed an extension of the sort of this delay for another 3 months, but after that the supermarkets are going to need a vet certificate, a health certificate on the goods, on the animal products that are moving into Northern Ireland, not just into the EU itself. And one of the other features of the situation with Northern Ireland is that if you're sending goods to Northern Ireland and it's deemed that they may be at risk of going into Southern Ireland, even if the delivery address is Northern Ireland, then it could be that duty is charged on those goods going into Northern Ireland, if duty would be applicable. So you could find yourself paying duty to send the goods to another part of the UK effectively. You can appeal against that, and you can register to have your goods deemed not at risk, as they call it. But again, it's another administrative burden, and it's a difficulty which probably no one thought about, or no one considered. Certainly, when you're setting up a business, you don't think about these things, but it's a cost. It's a time involved in handling it. And as we mentioned earlier, if you're sending goods to Northern Ireland and you're handling the import into Northern Ireland, you would need to have what's called an XI EORI number in Northern Ireland to show that you're dealing with Northern Ireland itself. So again, there are steps and complications that you need to follow in order to deal with Northern Ireland now. Not quite part of the UK as it was previously. Approvals, CE marking, we mentioned this a little bit earlier. Again, this is part of the trade agreement. The UK has introduced what we call UK conformity assessed, which is our equivalent of the CE marking. And for new products coming into the UK, we'll expect them to have a UK CA. It covers most of the same products as CE, will probably be pretty much the same. But you'll need to have this from the beginning of next year if you want to sell goods, electronic goods, for example, in the UK. So a lot of companies will have to have their products reassessed, because another part of this is that assessments that were previously done by an EU assessment house, for example, will not be recognised by the UK authorities. So you need to have a UK assessment, and the other way around. If you get a UK CA from the UK now, the EU won't recognise it as equivalent to CE. So it's not going to be recognised as an equivalent assessment or conformity. So you would end up having to have two assessments, two approvals effectively for your product, which again, if anyone's ever been through this kind of process, it can be time consuming, it can be costly, and it can be a real pain. So if you've got to do it twice, it's not great, but that's the rule as it is. So there's no mutual recognition of our conformity assessments, basically. So both, you'll have to have both of them. Now, again, one of the big implications, and one of the ways that that governs some of these other things that we've been talking about, like VAT, comes down to the Incoterms that you use. Now, Incoterms are basically the rules surrounding the shipment that you're sending, that you've agreed with your customer. So whether you choose Ex Works terms or DDP terms, they will affect who pays for what in the transaction, basically, and who's responsible for what. So previously, when we sent to the EU, we didn't need to bother about this because we were just shipping and it was free circulation. But now these terms are very important in deciding who, as I say, who pays what. And it's important that these are agreed in advance, so that there's no confusion and so that there's no unexpected costs for you or your customer or for your supplier. So if you choose Ex Works Incoterms, that means that, let's say you're buying, you're collecting the goods from your EU supplier, you're collecting from their works. That gives you maximum responsibility. Or if you're doing it the other way around, if you're exporting and you sell Ex Works terms to your customer in the EU, that gives them maximum responsibility, and they have to deal with the export customs declaration in the UK and the import declaration in the EU, and they have to pay for both of those. And in that case, they would have to have a UK, a GB EORI number, possibly a VAT number, and they would also need a EU EORI number, and so on. So Ex Works can be quite complicated. What we advise customers to try and do is either FCA or DAP, which basically means that you're responsible for your import or export declaration in your country, and your customer or supplier is responsible in their country. And the difference between the two is just who pays for the freight cost, the transport cost. But otherwise, the declarations is the responsibility of each person in their own country, as is the VAT and duty that might be due. And if that's if that's not clear, if you choose the wrong one, for example, if you're selling something from the UK and you inadvertently agree to DDP terms, or your courier, you have to watch out that your courier doesn't just select those for you, because they tend to do that because it's easy for them if you haven't told them otherwise. Then DDP means delivered duty paid, and that would put the burden onto the UK exporter to pay the VAT and the duty in the country that they're shipping to. Now, unless you've got a VAT number in that country, you won't be able to reclaim that. So that becomes an additional cost, anything between 17 and 27%. So that can be quite a shock. So as I say, I think it's critical that we get you get the Incoterms correct. This is for B2B that we're talking about here. For B2C, as we've seen, it's a little bit different. You can use the one-stop shop system and so on. Effectively, you have to be responsible for the VAT anyway. But if it's a shipment over 150 euros or it's a B2B shipment, then getting the Incoterms right is critical. So getting set up right in the first place is very important. And discussing with the clients, discussing with your suppliers, making sure everyone's in agreement, keeping them close, we call it, is very important. And then that leads on really to who is the importer of the goods. Actually, it's not as easy as it sounds. The importer of record can be different, and it brings different responsibilities. It can mean that the person importing is responsible for compliance of the product, for ensuring that the product really does comply with CE, for example, and which can mean handing over a technical product file to every customer and so on. So there are implications of this. Being the importer of record also means you're liable for the VAT, for example, as we talked about. And you may therefore need to appoint a responsible person or authorized rep in the country that you're selling to handle your transactions or your importer record responsibilities. Again, this is mainly for B2B, doesn't affect B2C so much, but for B2B, this is the kind of thing that because needs to be agreed anyway, needs to be discussed in advance. If you're supplying on the terms that we've just suggested, FCA or DAP, this won't affect you because you're not the importer. You're the exporter in that case, and your customer becomes the importer. And the final slide in this part is e-commerce, which we've already talked about a little bit. These have changed. The e-commerce directive no longer applies to us, so effectively we have to comply with the e-commerce rules in every EU country, which can be a little bit different, even though it's the EU. Each country is a little bit different, and Norway and places like that are a little bit different. So you need to be sure that you're complying with the rules and regulations in each of the states. As we've seen, VAT has to be charged at the local rates in e-commerce now, so the country that you're shipping to. And you may need a fiscal representative in the country in order to have a local VAT number, or even to apply for this new import one-stop shop system. There are data transfer, data management considerations, GDPR, for example. Again, you need to be aware that you comply, or make sure you're complying with the rules. And as we've seen, customs declaration is now required with every package for e-commerce. So you need a commercial invoice, there needs to be a customs declaration, and so on. And you need to have everything in place to make sure it runs smoothly that we've just been talking about. Some companies are started to use EU fulfillment centres. So you send your goods and hold them in stock in the EU, and then the fulfillment centre there handles it, like Amazon, for example. And we should consider now using the one-stop shop, the import one-stop shop that we just talked about. So as we can see, there are a lot of implications of Brexit, a lot of changes that they've brought in for both B2B and B2C, no matter what the size of the company. And to a certain extent, the burden is higher for smaller companies because it's a bigger percentage of their time and effort to deal with these changes compared to a large company. But companies large and small have been struggling with some of these changes and still continue to do so. And we have new customers every day with new requirements. Okay, so we've gone through quite a lot of information there, and there's a lot of implications, as we've seen, for importers and exporters of Brexit. So what we've tried to do is look at how do you address those challenges, what do they actually need to do, and try and summarize it for people to make it a little bit easier and make a bit more sense of it. We've actually developed a post-Brexit guide, a free guide, which can be downloaded from our website, from that link there, and that gives some good indications of what you need to do. But we'll just go through quickly what you need to do from an import point of view, and then from an export point of view, sort of step by step. So the first thing is getting your EORI number. Certainly, if you're a UK company, having your UK EORI number, and working out if you need an EU EORI number or an XI EORI number for Northern Ireland as well. Next, you need to know the HS code, this customs harmonized code for your product, and that will be used so you can check any certificates and any licenses that are required for your product, what the procedures are for importing or exporting your product. Next, you need to review the VAT. As we've seen, that's a very complicated area, or can be a complicated area. So you need to understand the requirements now and the procedures. What do you need to do? What are the implications? There's not one answer that fits all. It depends on how you want to do it, basically, how you want to, what tasks, what roles you want to take on. Then if you're importing, you need to know the requirements for import declarations. You either need to train staff if you're going to do them yourselves, but most likely companies will use their freight forwarder or their courier company to handle the paperwork for them. But you need to decide that, you need to be aware of it in the first place for the customs declarations and so on. Special procedures, are you going to use any custom special procedures? We haven't talked too much about that, but there are some ways of overcoming some of the duties and some of the issues by using a customs warehouse, for example, or processes like inward processing, where you can bring goods into the UK duty-free if you're going to process them, and then they're going to go out again, for example. So there are different areas that can be, businesses can use to try and overcome some of the potential duty issues. Do you need a deferment account? So for duty, for example, so if you're importing a lot and your goods have duty on them, you may be worthwhile setting up a deferment account. There's no guarantees. It's quite required now. It's quite a straightforward process, so that you don't have to pay at the time of import. The duty is deferred until the end of the month or the beginning of the next month. Make sure you've checked your supplier. Make sure that they have everything they need to be able to export to you. We're talking about importing into the UK here. So have they got everything they need? Do they have their EORI number? Do they have the correct paperwork? Do they have, do they know what they're doing as far as export declarations are concerned in their country? And do they have any licenses if it's required to export, and so on? And then looking outside of the EU for the rest of the world, what are the implications for suppliers from the rest of the world? Look at the free trade agreement. Is there a free trade agreement with the country? If you're importing from Japan to the UK, there's a free trade agreement. There's a free trade agreement with South Korea now, which has its own benefits and implications for you, which you need to look at. What we've talked about here is a lot is to do with UK and EU, but there are obviously rules that apply for other countries as well. Duties and quotas you need to look at. So that's if you're importing. That gives you a guideline of some of the things the areas that you need to look at. And the same if you're exporting. You need to make sure you've got your UK EORI number and EU EORI number if you need one, if you're going to be the importer into a particular country. The HS codes again, the VAT. What are the VAT requirements? Are you going to use a one-stop shop, for example? And Intrastat is required as well still on just for this year. Compliance, do you know the requirements for your product? Do you know the labeling? Do you know the CE marking or REACH? Whatever the rules and regulations around your product are, know that you have to understand the compliance that's now needed to export into the EU, which wasn't there before. Again, customs declarations, how are you going to do them? Who's going to do them for you? Can you make use of any of these customs special procedures? Make sure you understand what the duties are for your products, if there are any. Again, if it's UK origin, then there'll be no, and you're exporting it, there'll be no duty. But if it's not, and you can't prove it, then there could well be duties. Keep them close. We say this, work closely with your customers, with your distributors, your freight forwarders. Make sure you've agreed and reviewed terms. We looked at the INCO terms just before. And it's important that you agree everything in advance to make sure that things run smoothly and there's no surprises for anyone. Check with your customers that they're ready to receive the goods and they have their things in their side in order, like a EORI number for them, and so on. And again, looking at the rest of the world. So it's just a sort of step-by-step guide there of the things to consider when exporting in this case. But we've a more detailed guide through that link that we just mentioned earlier. But the rules of origin, I've sort of hinted that this is a major area a few times with the implications from the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement. Is one of the areas that came as a bit of a surprise to a lot of people, that it can have quite an effect on their business. So we're going to look at what it says, what bilateral accumulation is, sufficient transformation, which is a big thing. Have you done enough to the product to be able to claim UK origin? And what are some of the solutions, and how do you prove origin? So the agreement says that there is zero duty between the UK-EU TCA says that there's zero duty for all qualifying goods. Now, qualifying goods is the key phrase there. Your goods have to qualify to be able to claim this preferential duty rate. And it applies both ways. So the EU goods coming into the UK is zero duty, same as our goods going to the EU. There's no quotas or movements of goods, which is great, so there's no limits, but you must be able to prove the origin of the product. So if you're exporting from the UK, you must be able to prove that it's a UK product. And the same if you're importing from the EU and you're claiming zero duty, you need to be able to claim that it's an EU product. You need to have the evidence for that. And there are, just to make it even more complicated, there are different rules on what qualifies as a UK or EU product for different products. There's not one constant rule. It really varies, as we'll see in a moment. And it all starts with this customs code, the harmonized standard code that we talked about before. So really, you do need to know exactly what your code is for your product, for everything that follows. It's the real starting point for exporting or importing. So we said there's different rules for different products. So here's an example. So for vehicles, so its HS code is chapter 87, it's called. And then, so with products with the subheading 8701, so that's the first 4 digits of their customs code. Normally you have to quote between 8 and 10 digits, but the first 4 digits. The max non-percentage is 45%. What that means is the maximum level of non-originating products or materials in your product, in this case, can be 45%. So if the selling price of your product is 100, you can have 45 pounds of that in value can be non-originating, non-UK products, and you can still claim it as a UK product. Okay, but for other subheadings like 8702, 03, and 4, it's 70%. So you could have up to 70% of your product as materials which originate outside the UK and still be able to claim UK origin in that particular case. That's quite an exception. That's for batteries and things like that, for hybrid vehicles. It's areas where the government is trying to encourage investment in the UK or to allow products to come into the UK, to support a particular industry, for example. Hybrid vehicles, it's 60% maximum is required. But in most cases, in most standard products, it's around that 45 to 50% level is allowed, if anything is stipulated. In some codes, there isn't a stipulation. So it can either be the max non-percentage, the maximum non-originating material percentage, or CTH. Now, CTH stands for change in tariff heading. So we saw here that the tariff heading here is 84667, for example. If that changes from the work that you've done on the product in the UK, so if you've brought in 10 different materials of different HS codes, but they've changed into something completely different, there's been sufficient transformation of that product, then you can claim it as UK origin as well. And some products have where you can change the tariff subheading, so you can change up to the sixth digits, basically. So a lower level of transformation that's required. So these are the kind of rules that apply. So you can see it's quite complicated. You have to look at each product, and we have to look at every client. We've developed a guide, but also a workbook for our clients to work through, where it actually breaks it down for them, so they can put down what the value of the product is, what constitutes, what comes into that product in terms of materials, in terms of processing that's carried out in the UK, and so on, to allow them to be able to claim that it's a UK origin product. So quite complicated rules. One of the positive aspects of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement is something called bilateral accumulation. And what that says is that anything you buy from the EU, parts, components, or processing that you bring to the UK as forms part of your product, can count towards UK origin, which on the face of it sounds great. So you can buy a part from the EU, or a material from the EU, and you can put it into your product in the UK, and that material from the EU is classed as UK effectively in terms of the origin of the product. But there is one big but here. There has to have been sufficient transformation on the product in the UK. There's a whole list of activities which are deemed insufficient transformation, where duty would apply to the product because you can't claim you can't claim bilateral accumulation in this case. So for example, if you bring a product from the EU and you just hold it in stock in the UK and then resell it to the EU, that's not going to count. We'll look at that in a moment, but you need to do sufficient transformation in order to be able to claim that the product is UK origin and claim preferential duty, zero duty. So first, instance, so if you import from the EU, you hold it in stock, and then you resell to the EU, that's deemed as insufficient transformation. There's no transformation there, you're just holding it in stock and then you're reselling it, so duty would apply at the WTO rates that we saw earlier. I mentioned at the beginning about the Marks and Spencer's Percy Pig situation where they were importing from Germany the Percy Pig product. They didn't do anything to it, they just held it in stock and then were selling it to Ireland. They effectively would have to pay duty on that because they're not doing anything to it. They're not processing it in any way, even though it's an EU product. Even though you would think under the bilateral accumulation you should be able to claim it as a UK against UK origin, they couldn't because they weren't processing it in any way. So that's one of the consequences of the hidden consequences, if you like, of the trade and cooperation agreement that a lot of people didn't pick up on, certainly initially, but certainly now they're all picking up on that. Now there are certain ways that the Marks and Spencer's been able to overcome that. There's something called return goods relief, where you can actually send goods back to the EU duty free if they've been in the UK for less than 3 years, if they haven't been changed at all, if they haven't been worked on at all. So in this case, they could probably use that. But that comes with complications as well, because you have to prove the import and you have to show the value of the import as well. So your customer would start to know what you paid for the product. So it's not always ideal to do that. So it's a complicated situation. So the next situation is if you import from the EU and then you bring it into the UK and then you repackage it and relabel it and then resell to the EU. Now, would you think that that's enough to give UK origin? Actually, no, it's not. It's insufficient transformation. Again, you're just repacking or relabeling a product, putting your own label on it is not sufficient to claim UK origin. So a lot of people think that they can do that. They think they can just bring it in, repack it, put a different brand on it and send it back and it'll be fine. But no, you can't do that. And finally, so if you import from the EU, then you process the goods in some way. Let's say you manufacture them into a different product and then resell to the EU. Well, in that case, yes, assuming that there's been sufficient transformation, then duty will be 0%. So you can see it's quite complicated to work out and to understand, and it really is catching a lot of people out. Doing some work for some big companies on this, and they don't understand it either. And for some products, it's difficult to tell where the components have come from, and where they originate from. So it can be difficult to prove. We just mentioned some of these sort of custom special procedures which can help to overcome some of these things. So, for example, a customs warehouse. If you imported, like the Marks and Spencer's example with Percy Pigs, if they imported that into a customs warehouse in the UK, a customs warehouse is deemed not part of the UK effectively, so it's not cleared the goods into free circulation in the UK. So then they retain their EU status and they can be re-exported out of the UK again without any duty. But again, there are complications with that. Return goods relief we've just mentioned, again, where you could send it back out if it's within 3 years, duty free, send it back to the EU. And there's things like inward processing, outward processing, where you can, export or import a material, not pay any duty on it, put it into a processing procedure basically, and then send it back out again without ever having paying duty on it. But some of these you have to apply for, you have to get approval for. They're not straightforward, and they're not straightforward to administer either. And generally will only be used by big exporters or importers and the like. Proving origin can be difficult. You might think in the examples we gave, well, if you repackage it, how will anyone ever know? Well, they can come and they can audit you, they can demand the evidence, and and if you haven't done it, if you haven't done it correctly, then you can be in trouble. There can be fines, there can be sanctions, and all sorts of things that can happen. And they're quite within their rights to do, and they do spot checks and so on this kind of thing. So it's best to do it right in the first place, because you need to hold evidence to prove the origin of your product. You need to keep the paperwork trail, the evidence of it. You may need evidence from your original suppliers. You may need a supplier's declaration to show what the origin is. It is possible to self-declare the origin, but again, you've got to be able to prove it behind that. And as an importer, you can use what's called importer's knowledge. So you can say, yeah, I know that that's an EU product. I'm going to bring it into the UK. But again, if challenged, you need to have the evidence to prove that. So it's best to have that evidence from your supplier. There's some dispensations on having the proof in place up to the end of this year. So no one's going to really check until the end of this year. But after the end of this year, you'll have to be able to prove any shipments that came in this year as well. So it's best to have the evidence in place now. And one of the ways you claim origin is by putting a statement on your invoices. So for example, the exporter of the products covered by this document, blah, 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 declares that they're of UK origin and preferential origin. So in that way, you're claiming the preferential duty, you're claiming that it's 0% duty. If you don't put that on your invoice, then your customer is going to get charged duty at the WTO rates anyway. So, or you can also have a long-term supplier's declaration, so something on record that you attach to your commercial invoice from your supplier, saying that all products that they supply are of a particular origin. So you need to be able to offer these, or to hold this evidence and supply this evidence as required. So it is complicated. Like we said, there was the biggest Brexit challenge that no one had ever heard of previously, and everyone thought would be sorted out by the trade and cooperation agreement, but it didn't quite. As you can see, there are a number of complications that people need to be aware of. And even if you're a trader, if you're just trading, you still need to be aware of this, because you may buy a product from a UK company or UK supplier that you're then going to export, but that product may not have originated in the UK. If they brought it in from India or from Timbuktu, wherever it might be, you need to have evidence that that product is UK origin from your supplier to be comfortable that you can prove it if you're ever required to. So as we can see, there are lots of issues that have been facing UK exporters and importers post-Brexit. What I've done in this section is just sort of try and summarize some of the main ones that we've come up with against, if you like, that our clients have been suffering from, shall we say, and how some real examples, I guess. Customs declarations. That's something that everyone is suffering with, the costs of them and the complications of them. There's lots of areas where this has been causing complications. For example, suddenly Brexit admin charges being added by courier companies and by freight forwarders that can sometimes take away any profit on the deal. Incorrect entries. So on every customs declaration, you need to put what's called a CPC code, which is the code that shows what kind of activity it is, whether you're exporting something permanently or if it's temporary, and so on. There's cases of the wrong codes being put in by either the company or by the courier company, and then goods getting returned, or incorrect duty rates charged to them. Had a lot of that with some clients, sending the same product to different customs houses or different countries, and one getting rejected, one getting through, inconsistent interpretation of the rules. This has been a real problem. I mentioned earlier about the health supplements company. They had all sorts of problems with shipments, even to the same customs depot in Germany, for example. They'd send one shipment one day and it would get through no problem at all. They'd send another shipment the next day with exactly the same information, but the same details on the customs declaration, and it would get stopped, or it would get returned, or it would get further information requested. So there's been a lot of issues like that. A customer just the other day saying skincare products that same kind of thing. One shipment gets through, the next one doesn't, and there's no real reasoning behind it. We've thought a lot about this, and what we think is happening is just like in the UK, where the number of customs declarations has gone up sixfold. The same is happening in Europe. So authorities have had to very quickly increase the amount of staff that they have, the amount of people that they have. And I don't think that the training has necessarily been as good or as thorough as it should have been. And the systems are maybe not quite coping. So some people are just, are not following it quite correctly. So there's inconsistency there until people get to understand exactly what the role is, and understand the systems themselves. So we think that that's probably what's going to happen. That's been happening that's why it's been so inconsistent. But it's certainly that customs declaration has caused clients, and still is causing clients, a lot of issues, not to mention the costs. 20 to 60 pounds per entry and other costs. It can really make it not worthwhile in some cases, sending the goods. And the other thing with customs declarations is getting the Incoterms correct. I mentioned those earlier. What are the shipping terms? Who's responsible for what? Who's responsible for paying the costs of the shipping, but also the import VAT and duty and so on. Those need to be correct. And if they're wrong, or if you've not stipulated them because you didn't know about them, then what happens is often the courier company will just put on what they think. And often that will be DDP because that's easy for them. It means that they effectively pay the VAT and duty on your behalf, but they charge it to you and they collect it from you. And you haven't got the ability to reclaim that. It's just a cost. You can't reclaim that VAT. So we had a lot of cases early on where that was happening for clients because they just didn't understand what they should be putting on there, and the courier companies were just putting on what was easiest for them. So again, that's sort of settling down, but if it's a new company that's starting to export, they need to make sure that they're aware of that. One of the other big areas that we found is that existing customers for UK companies, saying to them, well, you voted for Brexit, we want the delivery to be the same as it was before, or else we're going somewhere else, we'll just buy from the EU. So they don't want to handle the VAT on import. They don't want to handle any duties. They want to just get the goods in exactly the same way as it was before. It's invoiced and it comes to them, basically. Which means you've got to, the business has got to work out how do you do that. You've got to deliver DDP, deliver duty paid effectively, but it has big consequences, as we've seen. You've got the VAT complications. You need to have a local VAT number to be able to do that, to reclaim the VAT. You become the importer of record in the country. You're responsible for the duty. Or you've got to have a customs warehouse and route everything through there in the EU, or a fulfillment warehouse there. There are ways around it, but it's becoming complicated. And it's definitely, there's been investment that's gone out of the UK and into the EU. There's a cheese company here where I live in Macclesfield that was just on the verge of spending about £1 million and investing in expanding their facility here. But they moved it to the EU because of these complications, because they it would have been so difficult for them to export. So they've effectively split their business into two, which is taking money and taking work, profits out of the UK, of course, and investment. And a lot of inward investment we're finding is being split in many ways. People still want to come here. US companies we deal with, they still want to come to the UK, but if they want to sell into Europe as well, they're considering having somewhere in the Netherlands in a lot of cases, so that they've got a foothold in both, to make it easier for them. So I think over time these things will certainly come out, and people will understand that what the real cost of Brexit has been, and it's been high for individuals, for businesses, and nationally it will have been high as well. The rules of origin we just looked at, that is one of the key areas, one of the big things. We have a client that imports from one of their own group companies in Italy. They import machinery. They used to import it into the UK, hold it in stock in the UK, and then they would ship it back out to other customers in other EU countries, for example. And they found, obviously, that under the rules of origin in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, they had to charge, or their customers were getting charged duty on those products. And in their case, it was something like 8 or 9%, and it was on machinery that was worth several £100,000. So it was a big cost for their customers, which they weren't prepared to take. So they had to find a way around that. In this instance, they could send it from their group company, but that loses business, loses profits in the UK. So again, you've got issues of the viability of UK companies from moving forward from there. Triangulation has definitely been a big issue for a lot of customers. So if you recall, triangulation is where a UK company would buy, well, let's say they would sell something to a company in Hungary, for example, and they would buy it from Germany, and they would ship it directly from Germany to Hungary previously before Brexit, and that was no problem. You could do that without any complications in terms of VAT or customs and so on. Post-Brexit, you can't do that. The VAT would be charged. You would need to have a VAT number either in Hungary or in Germany to be able to do that transaction in that way. And I have one client who's doing exactly that process that I've just mentioned, and he's ended up actually shipping the goods from Hungary to the UK so he can ship it back again to Germany, because it was the only way he could really do it, because he wasn't doing enough business to warrant having the admin costs of a VAT number there and so on, so far anyway. So these are all real difficulties that customers are facing and continue to face in a lot of cases. Certificates and licenses, again, is a big area that we've seen. We've all heard this on the news. We've seen it on the news. We've talked about the sausage wars. There's shellfish that was earlier in the year. There's still a problem for shipping out live fish to different countries, live animals to different countries, needing export health certificates and so on. Getting those certificates in time, the demand on veterinary services and health and safety officers in this country is very high for them to be able to deliver these certificates. So they're not always being able to do them in time. So consequently, I had one client who had £100,000 worth of shellfish just stuck at port, live shellfish that had to be destroyed. So it's real consequences for people. So you need to, as a new exporter or importer, need to be aware of exactly what certificates are required, and that there are new regulations that you really need to follow. And we've already mentioned about the CE versus UKCA. Company I just mentioned importing from Italy has a CE approved product, but to sell in the UK now, they'll have to get it reapproved as UKCA as well, which again has costs and timing implications and inconvenience and so on. Northern Ireland is an area which is still causing quite a bit of confusion and consonance, I should say, and likely is to be a flashpoint. It has been a flashpoint already. We've already had instances where customs officers have been withdrawn from borders because of threats and things like that, because it's a highly emotive subject in Northern Ireland that it's in many ways is not part of the UK from a trade point of view in some parts of trade. And a lot of the you need to understand the rules and regulations for supplying there. The government has set up what's called the Trader Support Service, which is a good free service that helps people to overcome some of these barriers, and we recommend our clients to register for that. It's free, and then they can help with customs declarations and the paperwork requirements and so on. It's also worth registering your products as not at risk of going into the EU, into Southern Ireland, so you don't have any danger of being charged duty when you shouldn't be for goods that are going to end up or stay in Northern Ireland. So there's complications around that, and that's been the number of our clients have had that issue. On the other hand, some clients have actually used the fact that the XI EORI number in Northern Ireland can be used as an EU EORI number, and they've used that as a way of overcoming the triangulation issue that I mentioned previously. There's a way of doing it. It's quite complicated, but there is a way of doing it to overcome that kind of issue. So there's swings and roundabouts, I guess, in some of these situations. So we've looked at there with a lot of information there, obviously, about what are the implications of Brexit, what are the challenges, how can you overcome them. Each case is a little bit different, and we spend a lot of time reviewing businesses to help them to develop the best operating model for them moving forward. You can't always avoid everything, and there are some things which people are just going to have to get used to, and there will be changes. There are changes in supply chains, the way where people buy goods from, for their businesses, and in some ways it's good for UK companies that may source more in the UK than they did previously, but the same applies in reverse. The EU companies are sourcing more in the EU than they probably did previously, so it can affect business both ways. So, but there's definitely a lot of implications that needs to be worked through, in a logical fashion, starting with the HS code, the Harman's customs code, working out what the requirements are for your particular product, what your customer requirements are, how you want to sell, what you feel comfortable with in terms of the VAT and so on, agreeing the Incoterms so that everything is clear throughout the whole process. And those things need to be agreed. So I guess the question is, how do you trade internationally, and how do you grow in the post-Brexit era? It all makes it sound like it's totally impossible. I understand that, but it's, there are ways of doing it, and there are benefits, advantages. There are opportunities from post-Brexit. So but of course there are other challenges. It's not just Brexit at the moment. We've got plenty of other challenges, haven't we? We've got it's an uncertain world. It has been for a while. We've got COVID-19, which has been, an incredible burden on business, recessions. Before that, accelerated technological change was really disrupting markets as well. Environmental concerns. We've had racial, political, economic inequality. Donald Trump. These kind of things. There's a whole host of disturbances in the normal way things operate. That growing importance of corporate social responsibility, awareness of environment, and so on. Which means that businesses have to be aware of all of these things, not just Brexit, when they're planning their business. And it's coined the phrase "always on change." This was coined by the Harvard Business School, and it means that businesses always have to be on the lookout for what's coming, and always looking at how to change their business, not just Brexit, but everything. But there is a psychological effect of leaving the EU for UK companies and for EU companies. I mean, the EU over the years that we've been involved with it, with the euro and so on, it has developed this European mentality rather than so much a nationalistic mentality in many ways, and that's obviously something which a lot of people didn't like, and one of the reasons for Brexit in the first place. But it has caused this what we call the psychological effect, so that the UK is no longer viewed as European. So there's this European companies it's harder to get them to buy from you. It's harder to get them to believe that you're going to be able to deliver just the same as you did before Brexit, or it's going to be easy to buy, or and they start to look closer to home. But the same happens reverse. British consumers are doing the same in reverse. If they're ordering from a French website, they're going to think twice about it now if they've already had some unexpected cost from ordering overseas previously. So there becomes this bit of a siege mentality and a buy local situation, which is developing. We've seen it developing, and a fear of shortages, of course. But businesses can't stop. You can't stop your business. You can't do what we call a hedgehog scenario where you just curl up in a ball and hopefully it's just going to go away. It doesn't. You've got to develop. You've got to take these things head on and develop the business and look for the opportunities. There are barriers to trade now. With the EU, there's these customs declarations, duties, and VATs that we've seen, licenses, all of the things that we've been looking through, that we've been talking about. So some people have looked at it and said, is it worth it? So companies have, in some cases, stopped exporting, if only temporarily. I've got a couple of clients at the moment that have stopped, and we're working with them to work out how is the best for them to restart their European businesses. And they're trying to work out, is it worth it? Can we, with all these costs and the administration involved, is it really worth us doing it? In most cases it is, but it's a case of setting it up correctly and getting everything right, and not avoiding the sort of hidden costs. So looking at the barriers to trade, but looking at the ways around them and how to manage them, basically. So what we say to our clients is you need to take positive action. You can't just wait for these things to happen. You can't just leave it. You've got to be ready to firstly maintain your current business, but keep your customers close if you already have business, European business. Keep those businesses close to you, make them understand what you're doing, and make sure, did they send you that order you were expecting, or have they gone somewhere else, that kind of thing. Listen to their concerns is a key thing as well. Actually ask them, what are your feelings about Brexit? So many companies have buried their head in the sand or become the hedgehog and not even ask their customers what the issues are or what they're feeling. So that the same insecurities that we have about buying from the EU or being, they're having about in reverse. So you have to overcome those issues. You need to communicate with them. And we also advise to review your value proposition of your business. What is the value that you're adding to your customer, by them buying your product? It may have changed now. It may be different. So review all of that. Work on ways that you can build value with customers. Build value in your products. You're not just selling the USPs. You're selling the value. What is that product doing for you? For clients, and have a post-Brexit marketing message. It may have changed. Made in the UK might become a good one, or it might be a bad one, depending on point of view. But you need to look at the marketing message, and you need to reflect cultural differences. Make a big of a joke of it, maybe. There are different ways of handling it, but like all these things, just don't ignore it. At least reflect on it. And also look, at CSR, corporate social responsibility policies and actions are more and more important. Products with a good backstory sell well, particularly consumer products, B2C products. Increasingly important is having that backstory to make it attractive to the market. So these are the kind of things that we tell clients to look at in ways of overcoming some of these technical aspects, if you like, of Brexit. But of course, the other thing is you can look at new opportunities. Effectively now it's just the same to sell to France as it is to sell to South Africa or Australia. It's the same paperwork, it's the same process. So why restrict yourself? 135,000 UK SMEs only ever sold to the EU previously. They didn't sell outside. So that's a whole opportunity for them now, because the way they sell to those countries now is, as I say, is the same pretty much as the way they would sell to the US or to to Canada, to Russia, to Brazil, wherever it might be. So there's an opportunity out there to reassess your market, reassess where you're actually selling, to look at, how do you narrow that down, though, is of course the issue. There's 190 countries or something in the world. So knowledge and logic is one way of doing it. You know that the US is going to be a bigger market than the Maldives, for example, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the best market to go for, because the barriers to entry might be higher, or the competition might be higher. It might be more difficult to get into that market, whereas you might have an opportunity to dominate another market. So it's where the opportunities are, and we help customers to look at that data, look at what are the opportunities, what are the export opportunities there. One way of narrowing it down is to assess your in-house data. So if you're getting a lot of inquiries from a particular area, then it means that there's a demand. So have a look, why is that data, why are we getting inquiries from there? One company that we worked with was suddenly getting a lot of inquiries from Qatar and didn't understand it. They were active, but they were getting a lot more than normal. And one of the reasons was there was a dispute between Qatar and other countries in the UAE. So they're traditional in that region. So their traditional suppliers had effectively closed their border, so they couldn't buy from those areas. So they were having to import from further seas. So that opened up a whole new market for my client, which they took advantage of. But always be aware of what's going on. Learn from competitors as well. There is a very underused tool in export and international businesses. Where are your competitors selling? Where do they go to? Where have they got an office? Where have they got a distributor? Where do they go to exhibitions? Which trade associations are they members of? That kind of thing, that gives you a good indication of where the market is. Don't be afraid of where the competition are, because it's an indication of market as well. You can do market research, of course. You can buy market research, or you can get companies to do it for you. We do a lot of research for clients as part of a strategy program, for example. Look at free trade agreements. We now know we've got UK's got a free trade agreement with South Korea. Well, is there an opportunity there now to sell my products? Let's have a look. As Japan, we've got a free trade agreement with Japan. The UK free trade agreement with Japan is better in some ways for certain products, UK products, than the EU agreement with Japan was. They call it the Stilton agreement, because it's allowed Stilton to be sold in Japan as a protected geographical indication product, they call it. So the name is sort of protected. So that's something that's opened up that market for that. So look at those kind of opportunities depending on the product. As we said, size doesn't always matter in terms of the market. It's finding the ones with the best opportunity, not just the best size of market, and the growth. If it's a big market but it's declining compared to a smaller market which is growing, then there's an argument for going to the smaller country. And which countries is your product adapted for? Which ones is it suitable for? May not be suitable for every country that you're thinking of going for. And of course, we need to look at barriers to entry and the risks of going into particular countries. We do this on a market priority scoring. We evaluate all these different factors that we've been talking about. We give each one a rating, and we give each one a weighting. So which of importance to our clients and in choosing a particular market. So you give each of these a score: the market size, growth, the barriers to entry, your product adaptation to market, and so on. Give each one a score, and then multiply it by the weighting, and you get a final score, and it gives you a final total there. And the beauty of this is that it allows you to compare one country to another. So you can do 10 countries and you'll get a different score for each country, and then you can have a look and see which ones have the most priority or should be the biggest priority for you. No company can go everywhere, certainly not at once, and it's important to choose which are going to be your priorities. So in this case, the example we showed was a score of 16.5, so it's a prime target. It's a country that we should be looking at. But it gives you an opportunity to grade companies and to rank them by priority, basically. But as with anything else, Brexit, and it needs leadership, and it depends on the leadership, on their view of it, whether they become the hedgehog or whether they look for opportunities. So it does create new challenges, Brexit, but it also creates new opportunities, as we've seen. It does require innovation, and maybe you need to innovate your product or innovative thinking to get into a market, but it's making people think about things and think about the way they do things and if they're doing them right. And so in this uncertain world, as we've seen, leadership does become critical for all businesses, big or small, and how you handle it. So in the end of the day, we say go for it. We take a positive attitude with our clients. Let's look at where the markets are, plan for the challenges of Brexit, of course, embrace the changes and the new skills that you're developing. It's the same to sell to France as it is to Japan now, from in many aspects. So use those skills. Don't be afraid of selling to further away. Maintain your current exports, of course, that's a priority, but use your new skills to open a world of opportunities out there. But you do need to carefully evaluate the markets, decide how to go to market. Use of digital marketing is very important these days. It's the starting point. Google reckons 74% of B2B transactions start online. So there's, customers are more than 50% of the way to making the decision before they actually contact you. So digital website is very important, and what you have on your website is very important as well. You should be answering customers' questions, it's not just a brochure. It should be an information for people, so they get confidence in you and the product. We need to review our selling techniques in the Zoom era as long as that lasts, because to sell on Zoom is completely different than selling face-to-face, for sure. And companies need to plan their export strategy in detail, expand their horizons, and view Brexit as an opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. I hope everybody has taken a lot from that presentation. And what I'll propose to do is that we go through the questions that have been put into the chat, and then I'll just ask you if you have any that you want to add to them. So if I'll start with the first one, and this one is from Ioana, and her question was about the EORI numbers, and she asked, do you need an EU EORI number with every EU country that you sell products to?
No, you only need one EORI number in any EU country, then you can use that for every transaction then.
Thank you, Mike. And then the next question was mine, and these questions I put in the chat when you were talking about the different types of certificates for particular types of products, particularly in the animal and I presume and medical field. I would assume though that, as I mentioned there, that each industry has a body which clients could contact. And then my second question in support is, has there been any misinterpretations between those industry bodies and people like yourself?
That's an interesting question. The second part. Yeah, I mean, each industry does have a body which, a trade association or some kind of body that, whether official or not, that can help them, and their clients should contact. Yes, that is the case. If there's been misinterpretations, I think it's more a case of people learning as they go along rather than misinterpret. It's not people didn't know quite what the answers were to a lot of these questions, and until the trade and cooperation agreement was signed, there was no way for a lot of people to know a lot of these things or some of these things. So and because it was 23rd of December and Brexit was the 1st of January, it didn't leave a lot of time for people to plan and prepare for that. But I've not come across a lot of that, I have to say, in terms of misinterpretations between them.
Okay, thank you. Then the next two questions is about VAT, which for me personally, because I'm not a financial guru, I found the VAT section quite complicated. For me, it was quite a maze to work through. Oana, would you like to explain your question that you put in there?
Yeah, well, I was thinking when we were talking about VAT, I was basically thinking what happens with VAT when you sell services to consumers, basically. And I'm talking about services, not products, even though products are also about services. And if I want to take it a step further also, what happens when you sell online services?
Yes, well, online services you selling to consumers, then it's and even any services actually you're selling to consumers falls back onto you've got to charge the VAT of the rate in the local country, basically, for a consumer.
So you need to track the details of each one of your clients and then charge them differently.
Yes, you do, and you need to look at how you're going to handle that VAT as well, in terms of having a VAT number in those countries, or using the import one-stop shop. Import one-stop shop is an expansion of what used to be called MOS, the mini one-stop shop, which was for digital services, which you just mentioned. So it's expanded it to include goods, physical services, if you like, as well, and goods.
The business that I'm having in mind is a coaching and training business.
Yeah.
And so when they are selling, when they are doing coaching online now, and they can do it from wherever they are, provide those services, they will have to charge different VAT from what I understand, as you said, depending on where the client is.
Yeah, if it's B2C, yeah, then we'd need to have a sort of look in a bit more detail and see if there was ways around it for them. But in theory, yes, yeah.
If they have a branch in a European country, would they be able to handle all European customers through that branch?
Yes. Yeah, that's what a lot of companies are doing. They're either using a European branch or setting up a European branch, and then then it's just the same as we were before. You're part of the EU, so you can sell to any country within the EU.
I see.
Yeah.
And I do have one more question, if I may ask, about the product. And I have a client who is creating jewelry, low-cost jewelry, and she's importing raw materials from all sorts of different countries. She used to have European suppliers. So, from what I understand on the use of the transformation clause, if she manages to have a certificate of EU origin for her raw materials, and then she works on them here, i.e. puts them into different shapes or creates jewelry out of them, and then she sells them, she will not be paying VAT it's going to be one of those not VAT, sorry, duty. Yes.
Yeah, if she's doing enough to it in the UK, so if she's buying, she's buying metal and diamonds or whatever it is and putting them together, and it becomes a different HS code, different code, a different product, then she wouldn't pay, or her customers wouldn't pay duty when she re-exports them.
But does she need a certificate of of EU origin from the suppliers that she gets the raw materials from? I mean,
it's as wise to do that, yes, because then she's got an audit trail. So we always recommend our customers to get a certificate or a declaration of origin from their suppliers, yes, because the thing is that product she's bought from the EU might not be an EU origin product.
Exactly, it might be from China, but resold from an Italian supplier or whatever.
Exactly. So she needs to have that declaration from her supplier that it is an Italian product.
I see. Wow, things are complicated. Thank you.
It is complicated.
Yeah. Well, imagine having to get that certificate from all of your suppliers. I mean, it's
difficult, but that's why we say we advise people to start in plenty of time and start asking them for it. Yeah, I mean, you don't theoretically you don't need to have it in your records right now but you will do next year the best is to use this year to get everything in place, because
Yes.
you know you need to you
Of
will
course.
need it. Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that a lot of people have changed suppliers because of that.
A lot.
I know that she had issues with some of her suppliers and she dropped them because they couldn't issue certificates, or they couldn't issue some of the things that she was asking for. So
Yeah, and she's quite right. Definitely, she needs to protect
yeah,
herself and make sure she has everything in, you know, an audit trail effectively in place.
yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you very much.
The next question is again about VAT, but in relation to Northern Ireland. So if a English or Scottish or Welsh-based company imports into Northern Ireland, do they need to have a separate VAT number?
I assume that means if you're importing or sending from England or
Yeah.
into, no, then you don't, because you just charge VAT in the normal way. So you'd put you charge VAT on your invoice using your GB VAT number. So it's one of the strange things about Northern Ireland. There's a customs declaration, but in terms of in VAT terms, it's still part of the UK. So you would just invoice in the same way you did before.
Okay, thank you. Then the next question in the chat field is by Ian, and it's about the fear of shortages, and he just wants to know how real is that fear?
I mean, I think it was, well, at the moment, there's a lot of shortages in a lot of products, but that's not necessarily related to Brexit. I mean, it's more to do with, you know, COVID and lack of production over months because of COVID. You know, there's shortages in. I've been trying to get a fence for my garden. There's no wood, for example, and I've got a client that manufactures paint, and they can't get raw materials for that for till the end of the year, for example. So there are real shortages of materials, but not necessarily to do with Brexit anymore. At the beginning, there was a fear that there would be shortages because of delays at port and things like that. That doesn't quite seem to have materialized, you know, but certainly we still do advise clients to build in a few extra days in their supply chain or in their planning or in deliveries to clients, to just in case of delays at the border. But yeah, shortages is more to do, I think, now with COVID than sort of Brexit at this moment in time.
Okay, does that answer your question, Ian?
Yes, thank you. I've just put thank you at the bottom of the chat there.
Okay, thank you, Ian.
Thank you.
And then the next question is from Mark, and he is the champion for Lewisham. And his chat is, thank you, Mike, for taking the time for this presentation. So much useful information. An example of a question from a client: I plan to distribute or export dehydrated food products to France, Germany, Spain, and Netherlands. What do I need to do or prepare for when planning to enter these markets when base of operations is in England? So he did join a bit late in the session, so he might have missed your section.
Okay, well, yeah, there's a lot of potential questions there, but if we assume he's selling to a distributor, so it's B2B, you would start off with the HS code, the customs code for the product, dehydrated food, and by putting that into the government website, you can check what the rules and regulations are for exporting that product, whether you need any licenses and so on. Assuming that you've got the licenses in place, then it's a business-to-business transaction. So the key is to choose the right Incoterms, so the right shipping terms, if you like. So in this case, we recommend to clients, if you're exporting to a distributor, you use either FCA or DAP terms. What those mean is that with FCA and DDP terms, you're responsible for the export declaration in the UK, but your distributor is responsible for importing the goods into their country, effectively. The difference between the two is that one you pay for the transport and one they pay for the transport. But those are the recommendations, that you use FCA or DAP. It makes it relatively straightforward then for a business transaction, that in terms of VAT and so on, and who's responsible for what in terms of customs declarations. The only thing would be to check on the origin of the product to see you know, if it is a UK origin product, then there'll be no duty. But the only other thing is to see if it needs any kind of, you know, food license or certificate or something like that, which we'd need to look at a bit more detail to answer that. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yes, I think he did. Yeah, he's having a slight problem with his audio. So yes, I think he does. Does anyone else have any questions? Or if you have any comments?
No, I just wanted to ask for your contact details and whether we could give them to clients if they would like to.
Yes, please, by all means. Yeah. Yes, yeah, Maritta's got my contact details. We're very happy for, you know, for them to be handed out, no problem at all.
Yeah, great presentation.
Thank you very much. I know it's a bit difficult in some of the parts, like the VAT, like you just said. It's a complicated area, and it's, you know, ever changing a little bit as well. So, but there are lots of solutions and lots of different ways of dealing with things depending on each individual case, basically. So, but yeah, but it's definitely something you need to sort out, or you need to be aware of, or your customers need to be aware of.
Yes, I mean, what I would say to conclude is that whereas there's going to be companies who are already used to trading with those who've never had an agreement with the EU, they'll be very familiar with these kind of rules. But as you mentioned, very small businesses, they may have already just done their trade with the EU, and they're having to sort of like learn very quickly to keep the business going. So I think maybe the important messages for us to take forward when advising our clients, or when the champions come to advise their clients, is to look at their business plan, to work out their cash flow for the next 6 months to a year, and definitely get advice on VAT if they find it too confusing, to make sure that they do have the money to cover all the options that are open to them. On a positive, as you mentioned, there's more countries for firms to work with. That could have any kind of, you know, would have a knock-on effect on clients' business plans, I should say. You know, it could open up new countries for them to explore, or it doesn't. I would say this is still a positive step to sort of consolidate what they've learned already, maybe take a step back to sort of focus on which countries that they do want to focus on, and that might mean they might reduce their trade with the countries that they had been dealing with to maybe like 1 or 2, or maybe not at all. But I would say that's a positive, because it's given them the chance to make the right decisions for the future in the long term. So on that point, hopefully the champions and the national network will use this information going forward when they speak to their clients, or when they're having discussions in any kind of group events. Make sure that they take any opportunity that is available to them, and try and what's the right word, just to be positive and optimistic about what will take place over the next few years. Would you like to sort of end on a point, Mike, to end the presentation, or your one piece of advice, or one, you know, anything?
One piece of advice. There's a lot of stuff to go through there. One piece of advice, isn't there? No, I think what you've just said there, I think it is being positive. It's being, you know, being aware of what the implications of Brexit are, and working through them as they relate to any particular business, and making sure you've got the basics right, making sure you understand the basics, like the you know, the HS code and how that starts everything in terms of the requirements for your product, the Incoterms that you choose, and how that will, you know, dictate how things like VAT and duty are affected, and the origin of the product. Those are the, you know, the key elements that people need to consider for their businesses, and to get right, basically. So once you get them right, then you can move forward with confidence.